Welcome into the Fantasy Sanctuary. We are back with another best ball show, and I'm joined by Erik Beimfohr of Spikeweek. Erik, when it comes to sort of revolutionizing best ball tools and stuff like this, I'm not sure there's anyone who's really doing as much as Spikeweek are doing. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on. I'm excited to. I haven't been, Tom. I have a confession. I haven't been able to draft quite as much as I've wanted to so far because we have been busy, trying to crank out tools and content and everything. I imagine it'll settle down a little bit, in the middle of the core drafting season. But so I'm excited to, of course, talk some best ball, talk some DK, and which not enough people are talking about, man. So I'm excited to get into that and, of course, hop into a draft.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't drafted quite as many teams as I'd planned to just yet. Good afternoon to Pecan in the chat. Good man. But it feels like, we've got all the data now in terms of we've got the fixture schedules. It's a little easier to start looking at those kind of playoffs and start deciding which ones you want to prioritize. But you kind of touched on it about DraftKings. How do you feel about their offering in comparison to all the other providers? Because I mean, there's well over $30 million in best ball prizes out there at the minute. It's like, for new users, it could be a little overwhelming in terms of choosing where you want to play.
Yeah. So it's funny you say that because I had this exact thought over the course of the last maybe week or so. And so I actually put together a little best ball contest selector, again, up on Spikeweek for anybody that's not familiar, spikeweek.com, as Tom said. So graciously, we produce a lot of best ball specific tools. It's entirely best ball focused. So, you're not getting DFS from us. You're not getting sports betting. We are the best ball sickos, as what we call them. This is what we do. We build best ball tools because we're all very into it. But something I wanted to look into that too, because in recent years, you remember it would be like each site might have a tournament or a couple of tournaments for the whole year. And now it's middle of May and DraftKings has like 12 tournaments up. We've already filled a puppy. There's Best Ball Mania. Drafters has multiple tournaments up. And so I actually dug into that a little bit just to kind of see some of the differences in the payout structures and the advance rate structures and everything. And we love our good friends at Underdog. We would not be here if Underdog, had not revolutionized fantasy sports in general. But I will say, in terms of DraftKings, they really stepped up. They really stepped up big time this year. I love a lot of the structures and everything that they've put together on basically all of their tournaments. And what's really great about DraftKings is they kind of have something for everybody. And so whether you really want to grind kind of the nosebleed high stakes, they have options for that. You can win $1 million in their $555 tournament. They have some fun kind of, $100, $250 tournaments, even in the middle stakes that are either single entry or like 3 entry max. And then, of course, they have their big $10, which I'm going to be diving plenty into, their big $10 Milly Maker. But then there's just you want to play a 20 max $3 tournament. You want to play a $4 tournament, $9. They have absolutely everything. And what's even more great about that than just the price points is it gives everybody a little bit more chance to really enjoy what's the great thing about best ball. Obviously drafting teams, but a lot of these tournaments are much easier to advance or make the finals or really have a chance to get a real sweat and maybe make some money. And it's difficult, say in Best Ball Mania 4, for anybody, even the best players, to really realize any sort of, edge. Even if you draft well, it's just so unlikely to finish anywhere near the top. And we have some other offerings. I know Underdog will come with some as well that are already available on DraftKings that man, it's you advance to the playoffs. You only got to beat a few teams in each round. And then even the final round is maybe 20 or 30 teams. You are very well set up to have not just a great sweat, but a big score in those tournaments. And so it's just, I keep calling it a buffet. This is a best, this summer is a best ball buffet, man. If whatever you want, you like seafood, you like chicken, you like sushi, we got it all. There's something out there for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, you made so many great points there, because it's I think the point where most people learn about best ball is the first season where you do kind of a portfolio of drafts, and where that's 20 drafts or where that's several hundred, it's whatever it is that's a step up for yourself. And you don't really kind of get a grasp for best ball, in my opinion, until you've been through that playoff sequence once, and it's like you've got that sweat of, okay, well, I just had a really amazing team that just romped its way to the playoffs. And then you see all the other teams, and it's like, okay, well, where are my edges? And that's something which the Spikeweek tools are doing such a great job of projecting ownership. But I know that you and Rob had a great conversation this week, kind of talking about double stacks and how much people weren't actually double stacking with their quarterbacks as much as they should be. And you guys kind of identified a couple of them. Did you come away from that conversation where you were like thinking, all right, well, these are ones which I need to be targeting more often right now?
It's funny. We talked super quickly before we went live that's another great thing about best ball is that no matter how, into it you are, which I would classify myself as, the 0.01%, right, of people into best ball, is every conversation like we'll have today, you kind of learn something and stumble upon something. And so, yeah, we built best ball projected ownership, which of course is a little bit different than, say, your DFS projected ownership, because most players are drafted in every single draft. But there's a lot of fun nuances to players that get drafted together, and particularly like stacks, like you mentioned, where we do use, we built a statistical model that uses all the historical best ball data and then uses what the current, landscape is, ADP and player pool and everything, to kind of project how often players are being drafted together. And the one that really stuck out on the show to me, we of course outlined a few different ones, but it kind of encapsulates a few different things about best ball that I think are advantageous as a drafter, and it was the Seahawks. So when I think about the Seahawks, I think about the team that nobody wanted to draft last year, right? No, myself included. Nobody wanted to draft last year. We didn't even necessarily know that Geno was going to be the quarterback, right? It seemed very, very, very bad in Seattle. They clearly outperform like crazy, and quarterbacks are getting pushed up this year, but the market still hasn't really bought into Geno. No, like as great as he was for, I keep saying it was about 2/3 of the season he was great, and then not so great for the other third. But no one's totally bought all the way in to Geno. And then they draft Jackson Smith-Njigba, right? Which throws this weird wrinkle into projecting how to handle situations like that, where at least last year, even if you didn't like Seattle, you could say, look, it's only two guys. Like, even if they stink, it's DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett. Like, somebody's got to catch some passes. This year, the expectation, I think, across the industry is like Seattle's probably going to be a pretty good offense. I mean, they've invested a lot. Geno looked pretty good last year for the most part, but we have this difficult situation to deal with. How the heck are these targets going to get split up amongst those guys? And that is a totally viable, thing to worry about or be concerned about. But when I take a step back and I say, well, that is something to worry about in any one individual player in a vacuum, but this is a good thing for the offense. I mean, this is a great thing for Geno. He has maybe the best rookie wide receiver and two stud veteran wide receivers, plus good running backs. Everything is great for Geno. The division looks really good, right? There's not a lot of great defense besides the Niners being played in that division. But because we can't in a vacuum identify which Seahawks wide receiver we really want, we all have our preferences and they all make sense in different situations. But it's leading people to not stack the Seahawks. And it's like that doesn't make sense if we think the offense is good and all these players are great, if we're not stacking them solely because we can't pick the wide receiver. Because in your home season long league, yeah, you do have to pick the wide receiver, right? You got to be right about whether it's Metcalf or Lockett or JSN. In best ball, it's not really about being right. It's about this offense looks pretty good, and what happens if it's Lockett and JSN, right? Or, God forbid, we're not rooting for this. What if something happens to DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett? Now you have these two guys that would be going way higher if they were in that situation. And so I think about those kinds of things where the market is maybe just a little skittish, and there's really like the only reason to be skittish is because it's uncertain, not because we don't like any of these players or the offense stinks.
So with the tools you guys have got, it's kind of one of the best benefits of it for me is being able to see the stacks that you've got and how they're divided up and stuff. Particularly with DraftKings in mind, where there's the bonus structure where you get 3 points for a 300-yard passing game, 3 points for a 100-yard rushing game or receiving game. How much, when you've been drafting on Underdog or Drafters, when you come back to DraftKings, how much do you kind of put sway in that bonus structure and start thinking, okay, well, is that even more amplified for stacks in your mind?
I think so, because I mean, think about, of course, touchdowns. The value of stacking on Underdog is almost as good as anywhere else, but it has a lot to do with touchdowns. We're trying to capture all the touchdowns, right? The quarterback that throws for a bunch of them, and hopefully he throws a bunch of them to the guy that we paired with him. It makes logical sense. But on DraftKings, yes, you have a little bit, you have some other ways that players can kind of have big performances, right? Full PPR and the bonuses. But now those things are tied together, and those ceiling games can just be absolutely astronomical once you rack up all those things together, right? If using the Tom Brady example from last year, if they're throwing every down and they're scoring 50 points, and it's going to this one guy and he's catching a bunch of touchdowns, he's getting the 100-yard bonus, and Brady's getting the 300-yard bonus, plus you're getting those touchdowns, and you're getting even more for all those catches. It's like the correlation just absolutely compounds even more so on DraftKings. And then you also have 2 extra roster spots, right, on DraftKings compared to Underdog, which allows you to maybe sprinkle in a little more stacking or do some of the, right? It doesn't feel comfortable with 18 picks. Maybe if you say, I take Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, or the Seattle example, like, I don't love the value of JSN, I don't love the value of Metcalf or whatever. I don't want to use too many spots on that just because I want to stack the Seahawks. Well, on DraftKings, not that you want to forego that value, but you have quite a few more picks in your tool bag to be able to throw at some of these stacking things. And when it hits, it's unbeatable. I mean, look at Brady and Evans last year, especially in large field, like in the Milly Maker, you couldn't win. Even Mike Evans was 2% owned in the DraftKings Milly final, and you had no shot without him. And you're like, well, not that many teams have him. But in a tournament that big, there's going to be just enough that sneak that guy into there, even if they're low owned. Now, what happens if that guy is a little bit more popular? I mean, it's going to be the entire top, few hundred or whatever of the leaderboard. And so that's just the power of that correlation on DraftKings.
So over on DraftKings, obviously you've got those 2 extra roster spots, and just pulling a little bit into that kind of strategy. Do you automatically kind of end up giving those to the onesie positions, quarterback and tight end, or do you kind of just lean towards stacking and wide receivers because when they do hit those 100-yard bonuses, obviously it's such a big increase? I mean, last year in the final, I think there was the average roster build was 2.6 quarterbacks and 3.1 tight ends, so it was actually over 3. But I think it was just below 6 running backs and just over 8 wide receivers. But is there a particular preference that you have with those extra spots?
Yeah, that's where I go a little bit maybe different than the market. I certainly understand. I do think that that's what's nice about the 20 rounds is I think 18, it's not that we have to be super rigid with that roster constructions. You really do have to be more precise about exactly what you do with those late round picks when it's 18. It's a stark difference. I don't think people take into account the difference quite enough between 18 and 20, but I think generally speaking, and I think the data, particularly what you said with the finals data backs this up, that more people lean into the onesie positions. And I think it's for a couple different reasons with those extra picks. A, when you get to the late rounds, I mean, look at the wide receivers and running backs that are available there. It doesn't feel very good. You can get a starting caliber NFL quarterback, in the 19th round most of the time on DraftKings, and tight ends the same way. There's tight ends going undrafted that have definite fantasy viability this season. So you're getting a player that feels better, which makes people gravitate towards there. But people just also have this interesting psychology of the onesie positions where they just don't feel good about only having to, like, you see people that draft Josh Allen, right? And still they'll draft Josh Allen and then they take Geno in the middle rounds and like, I got to put Baker Mayfield on this team. Like, why? What is the point of Baker Mayfield on this team, right? But there's something about it that people prefer to use it on the onesie positions. And like I said, I don't think that that's wrong necessarily. I probably wouldn't. I might say it's wrong in the Josh Allen example, but generally speaking, it's not wrong. But so I want to kind of oftentimes go the other way. That's where I can use those later picks on. Just thinking about like some potential stacks, using the Bills as an example, like Deontay Hardy, right? Is not a guy I'm going to go out of my way without Josh Allen. You can mix him in, of course. He's just like any other late round flyer. But I would rather try to find that guy that is the skill player that sets me over the top in those late rounds. I can also find like guys who are, I can also try to target 2 years ago Eli Mitchell or Cordero Patterson, those guys who are like going undrafted. And when you hit on that late round pick, both over the course of a season, like Eli Mitchell and CPAT were, or in that any one individual week. I also think back to 2 years ago. I had this goes to what you were talking about with people need to experience like the sweat of the playoffs. You also need to experience the misery of losing with a really good team in the playoffs. I'm winning heading into like late games and Sunday afternoon, and in the big dog, which is the $250 buy-in on Underdog, had an awesome team and feeling pretty good about it. There's the guy in second or third has let me think about this, Byron Pringle and Isaiah McKenzie as his only two like live players that can pass me, and they both need to have good games. It wasn't just like, oh, they need to score 8 points. They needed to have good games. But the big dog, if you remember, at least back then, I don't know how it even was last year, was 20 rounds. Those guys were like 19th and 20th round picks back then. This guy used them on his like stacks and correlations that he had. And believe it or not, Isaiah McKenzie had like a 30 fantasy point game in week 16, and Byron Pringle caught 2 touchdowns, and I lost because of those guys. Whereas the onesie positions, you might gain a couple points, right? Okay, Mac Jones outscores Justin Fields by 3. Like, okay, that's helpful, but in the grand scheme of things, not that big of a deal. But when you hit that late round guy in any one week, like Isaiah McKenzie, or you hit Eli Mitchell in the 20th round when he's not drafted and he's the RB1 on one of the best offenses in the league, like that impact is massive as opposed to the onesie positions. So especially with other people really leaning into those positions, I tend to go the opposite way.
I think that's so well said, and I think it might be going back to another conversation you had with Pat Carrain a couple of weeks ago, talking about how quarterback scoring is so easily replaceable compared to other stuff. You look at the difference between good running back scores and good wide receiver scores, and like the next tier down, and it's much more noticeable than with quarterbacks. But yeah, so let's jump into a draft. We'll talk some more strategy as we go. So if there's anybody in the chat ready to go, let's get in there. We'll be going into the $10 one. Don't want to use me crowns. Got to keep those bad boys. Let's go.
That is a sneakily nice, if you play DFS or you're on Sportsbook or something like that, it is a sneaky nice perk of DraftKings having the crown rewards, and then they have achievements and all those kinds of things you can earn. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I feel like I always want to save them for a special entry or something I feel confident about. Yep. So for anyone who's not jumped in with DK Milly Maker yet, it is $10 entry. There's 1.2 million places up for grabs in it, and the final is a 1,400 person final. So when you get there, you're going to really need to hit the nuts. But if you finish inside the top 100, you're guaranteed 10K, which is pretty decent for a contest, which is going to cost you sort of, 1,500 to max. So I think there's a lot to like about it, particularly with the payout structure. I do think there'll be more small ones. It would have been nice to see some of the smaller contests be a bit closer to kind of Underdog's puppy style, where it's like they're only out for a certain window. I think that's what DraftKings hasn't quite nailed yet. It's like, you look at the $3 one where it's like 250,000 entrants or so, and it's like, well, there's just no reason to dive in them yet because they're not going to fill for quite a while. And, there's a small edge drafting now, but I've held off on all those. I've held off on all the single entries and the free maxes, but Yeah, this $10 one. I think this is probably about my 15th draft in there so far. So let's see how I'm doing. Filling up. We got 7 to 12. If you're in the chat, jump in there, and we should get going pretty soon. So, what's your kind of plan of attack at the minute, Eric? Are you still finishing up slow drafts on the puppy, or are you just fast drafts only at this time of year?
Pretty much fast drafts only. This is I like to joke about the slow drafters, but I of course understand why people would prefer a slow draft. My brain struggles with the I'm just gonna set aside a time every single day and then come back. Like I'll go through all my slow drafts, right, and hit all my picks on the clock. I feel my brain is so broken. I feel like I'm literally always on the clock, and you get that notification like, "Oh, you're on the clock." I know I have 8 hours to make this pick, but I can't. I just can't not do it. There's something about me. So the fast draft is just so much more gears towards me, where I can sit down, pop the phone up or pop the browser up and just hop into the draft. I can do other things at the same time as well. We've drafted so many teams that I don't need to be 100% focused. And then, we built tools with our draft hacker overlays that really make it a lot easier to sit and draft in a fast draft and make decisions, because the screen is kind of blinking at you or telling you where your correlations are or what your playoff stacks look like and all those different things. So I just prefer the fast drafting, but I think it's also partially a personal flaw.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I know that Mike Leone kind of wrote that the differences aren't huge in sort of fast drafts and slow drafts, but particularly on DraftKings, the slow drafts are just so incredibly slow that it really feels like, you could be making one pick a day sometimes, and not even that, and they can take up to 4 weeks to finish. And I lose the fire for that team. Sometimes it's like you get the draft pick and it's like, okay, well, I'll have a quick scan. And I find that I make more mistakes in slow drafts than I do in fast drafts. I'm probably queuing myself up to make a couple of mistakes tonight now. But,
there is something, right? I think there is something to when you take so long in between picks, like you said, days or whatever in between making a pick on any one team, you're not locked into that team, and you have to, oh, nice, the 103. You have to re-engage and almost reassess that team and reassess who's available and all that. And look, we're all human. We don't always do everything we need to do before that pick. You just hop in and you're like, oh, I like that guy that's at the top of the queue. Just take him and move on. And you are prone to mistakes because you have to re-engage to that team and think about what was I, you get to the 13th round. What was I thinking on this team? Because I don't remember. And so I think it is a skill. Drafting is a skill, but I do think slow drafting and being able to not make mistakes is definitely a skill, and a skill I don't have personally.
Definitely. So we've got a couple of familiar names in here at the very least. We've got Felix sitting at pick 12. We've got Beaker, who's been doing some nice content with yourselves over at Spikeweek. Do you recognize any of the rest of these, Eric?
I don't. That is a nice thing about DraftKings sometimes. Not that B. Kurt and Felix are in here, but that there's so many people playing on DraftKings that we don't necessarily know. You run into less of the, oh my gosh, I know 9 usernames in this, in this draft.
Definitely, and it's the whole sort of the badge and all that. Oh crap! And there we go. So at 103, what kind of where's your early lean on this kind of pick here?
I'm definitely. I know Christian McCaffrey is appealing to everyone. I actually have a pretty clear top 4, and it's not who go in the top 4 here. But again, especially in PPR, it is Jefferson, Chase, Kupp, and Tyreek Hill for me in the top 4. So I still like Travis Kelce fine, but he would be 6th and CMC would be 5th for me. So I'm one of the wide receivers.
Yeah, I think so. I'm kind of quite happy taking Cooper Kupp at the 3. I think for me, he's somebody that I could easily see being the wide receiver 1 this year. You look last year, even with the Rams being a complete and utter disaster, he was the wide receiver 2 in PPR points per game. And, the Rams had nothing going on offense, but they still managed to sustain Cooper Kupp, and they haven't really done anything to add to him. So Justin Jefferson goes at the 101. So we're up next. So where do you want to go with it? I'll let you make the first pick, Erik.
I'm totally down for Cooper Kupp. I think Cooper Kupp, if we set aside, which you can't, but if you set aside like the Stafford injury concerns, which is basically the only reason people are worried about Cooper Kupp, there's really no difference between him and Justin Jefferson at the 101. And we could probably make a case when Kupp got hurt, it was actually like him and Tyreek Hill as the top two guys. So Kupp is my 103. I'm happy to go Chase if you would prefer, since he lands here. But Kupp is I'm right there with you on Kupp.
Let's go with Kupp. I think, that's a nice, fun one. Whilst we start drafting, we've got a little bit of a wait to come back to. I'm just going to bring attention to some of the stuff that you can see here on screen. For anyone who's not watched a draft before with the Spikeweek tools, over here we've got the opponents of the players are playing in the sort of fantasy playoffs. We've got my exposures below them, which, like I say, I haven't drafted an awful lot of them. But the one thing which absolutely makes these streams so much easier is the draft board, which you guys built. Like, how much of a big priority was that for you guys this season? Or was that something which just kind of popped up out of nowhere?
Believe it or not, a lot of our tools, outside of the very initial couple of tools, which the general overlays that we're showing here, and then Draft IQ, a lot of the tools and the additions to the tools end up being these things where you just stumble across them as best ball players. And it's not that we stumbled across the lack of a draft board on DraftKings. I think everybody's been well aware that it didn't exist, but we also didn't exactly know what their plan was for 2023 best ball.
Yeah.
And then they launched the product again without a draft board. And we were just like, why don't we just build one? Like it's just a casual conversation. Hacker, my resident freaking wizard who builds all these tools, like the guy will just whip something like this together super quick. So we're a small team that's able to be really agile, and we just chatted really quickly about like, yeah, maybe we should build a draft board. And then all of a sudden we're just like, yeah, let's just do it this weekend. And then the next thing it's up there. So it adds a lot to the experience, and we're continuing to try to improve upon it. So anybody watching that ever has any suggestions or recommendations, please bring them to me.
Yeah, I really enjoy the Spikeweek Discord. I'm not particularly one of the most active people in talking in there, but it feels like, for me, being based in the UK, the amount of times where I wake up in the morning and I'm just scrolling through Discord and there's another update from Hacker who's just like quickly put together another new tool for these stuff. It's really cool to see, and I think it's going to go a long way to helping attract more people at DraftKings. Contest selection's better. Stuff like this makes it visually easier for people who are used to drafting on a draft board like everybody else should be doing. But
yeah, exactly.
So the first round's kind of played out. Not too many surprises. I mean, perhaps one or two wide receivers creeping in there who I didn't expect. We've got Felix on the end, who took Amon-Ra with pick 12, and then Garrett Wilson with pick 13 for that nice sort of two wide receiver start. And Felix is someone who's kind of made hay with being aggressive on certain players each year. Have you kind of come to terms with players who you want to be aggressive with this year yet, Erik? I mean, I know last year both of us got stung pretty bad on Trey Lance.
Yeah. It's not Trey Lance. So this will be everyone else should draft Trey Lance this year because he's not one of my, like core players. I'm okay with him, but this is actually the difficult thing I'm struggling with DraftKings, because the player I'm probably most excited about that I'm absolutely wanting to flag plant is Damian Harris on the Bills. I just love everything about Damian Harris. I cannot understand his underdog ADP. It's actually falling a little bit. I really can't wrap he goes, yes. I mean, even on DraftKings, I like him at that cost, but he's not a typical PPR type running back. And so I think that's my biggest struggle. He's like by far my biggest flag plant this year, the guy I'm going to draft basically as much as I can until he rises. But DraftKings, it's just a little bit different. Although I think the cost on here kind of offsets the lack of PPR profile that he has.
So we're almost back up with our second pick, and with that wide receiver heavy start, we've got Saquon, who's fallen to us. His ADP is 15.3, so he's kind of fallen nicely to us at 22. Are you in on Saquon, or do you want to look at someone else? Let's take Saquon. I feel like a Cooper Kupp Saquon start is pretty nice. Where do you feel like the teardrops come in? I know it's like this kind of third round into the fourth round, everyone kind of feels a bit rotten about it at the minute, but where's kind of the cutoff for you?
For me, I pretty much call it Ramondre. I think he's a huge tier break at running back, and then you can make a case for like I like Mark Andrews fine. I know you're a Ravens guy. I'm very in on the Ravens this year. I'm very excited for the Ravens. But even then, like Mark Andrews right there, I just feel like kind of falls into that next tier.
Okay, so we could go wide receiver with T. Higgins, or we could dual running back start it with like Ramondre Stevenson and Saquon and then stay away from it. Or do you want to go Lamar and see what comes back to us later on?
I think I prefer T right here. Yeah. But this is another one where I'm not going to be stubborn on really anybody. Like I said, up through that Ramondre tier, I'm kind of going to mix and match those guys. We all have our preferences. I think Saquon's a pretty fun fit with Kupp because they do play in week 17, which is a pretty fun little. If you can sneak Cooper Kupp and Saquon into that week 17 round, I would be pretty darn excited about that. And then of course, T plays the Chiefs, which is never a bad thing. But I feel confident in our ability to get running backs in the middle-ish rounds that we feel really good about. And on the full PPR site, I do like Ramondre. I do like we see Gibbs go. Like I like these guys. It's just I think the fall off at wide receiver happens pretty quick. Whereas at running back, there's still a lot of guys in the 6th through 12th round that I like.
Yeah, it's definitely. Like I'm writing a piece of a minute talking about like the running back dead zone as it is in 2023. And it's just so different to how it was a year ago and how it was 2 years and 3 years ago. And more of an impact feels like it's going to be the wide receivers. And if you don't get the right amount of wide receivers early on, then you're going to really struggle. I think, like generally speaking, I want an absolute minimum of 4 by the time I hit round 10. And typically find myself with at least 5. Because then it just gives you that freedom to kind of move away from it. There's quarterbacks in that round 10 to 12 range who are okay. There's tight ends around there who are okay. But if you don't have 5 wide receivers by round 11 at the absolute latest, I just feel you're on a path to a hiding.
The thing that, it's easy to kind of cherry pick one individual player who ended up mispriced in a season. But even last year, where everybody got mad because we pushed up the wide receiver ADPs, right? This has gotten out of control. Everybody was upset about what we did to the wide receiver ADPs. Even with that, Devonta Smith was still going in, let's call it the 7th round. Even after we pushed up wide receivers, he was like a 6th round pick. This is a Heisman Trophy winning wide receiver from Alabama, 1st round pick on an offense everybody was excited about with a very tight target tree, right? And we still only pushed that guy up to maybe the 6th round. On DraftKings, not even, right? And so now this year we'll get to that 7th round of wide receiver and compare the difference between Devonta Smith and those guys. And so the drop off is just quicker this year. And so I couldn't agree more with like, I really want to make sure that I'm getting wide receivers early. There will always be running backs you can pivot to later. But if you fall off that cliff at wide receiver, you can't recover with the late round guys.
That's it. And the wide receivers who do give you okay weeks, so often just, it's 1 week out of sort of, 10 or whatever. So we're 2 picks away. 1 more pick to make. Joe Burrow, if he falls to us. Of course he does.
that would have been sweet. What do you? I want to ask. That's who I of course would have taken, especially with a fall right there. Who do you? I like the wide receivers here, but I don't have a strong preference. Ridley, Cooper, etc.
No, I'm kind of okay. I think I kind of lean towards Calvin Ridley. Let's go with him, and then let's see.
Yep.
Maybe perhaps we get to Trevor Lawrence when he comes, when we get down there for that. But in terms of this draft, we'll pull up the draft board again. Last time I drafted on a stream, it was quite a normal draft. There was nothing too crazy, but we've definitely got a few picks here. We've got a 3 RB start from the guy at pick 2. Then we've got further down, we've got Mahomes and Justin Fields for one drafter, Hurts and Lamar for another drafter, double tight end, double elite tight end. So it's definitely throwing us some stuff. Do you want to take Christian Kirk and really target that Jag stack, or do you want to
do it? Let's do it. You can always. This is another thing we've been talking about a lot lately. Corinne and I actually recorded another episode today that's going to go live tomorrow, talking about this, and we've tried to reiterate it a lot that you can target this stack or any stack in your draft in the first 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds, and even if you don't get that quarterback, you're okay. Like, sure, would we prefer to get Trevor Lawrence on this team? Yes, that would be nice. But even if you don't, we talked at the top, like the quarterback points are the most replaceable part of your entire lineup. You can get to week 17 and be happy that you have the Jags wide receivers and be happy that Trevor Lawrence has a good game, because you just need your quarterback to come close enough to Trevor Lawrence. And honestly, most of the time, that's what happens. We don't get 45-point quarterback games that just beat everybody by 20-something points. What you do get is those wide receiver games, like we continue to get every year, apparently in week 17. Mike Evans scores 50. Jamar Chase scores 50. And you can't win without those guys, particularly in this tournament with 1.2 million teams in it.
Yeah, and I mean, Pat's article about go ahead and snipe me was really good, but it's also that kind of thing of like, well, we're talking about quarterback replacement scores. Like Trevor Lawrence had less 300-yard games than Jared Goff did last year, and Jared Goff was going several rounds later. Yep. I think Trevor Lawrence had 4 of them, and Carson Wentz had 3, Matt Ryan had 3. So it's like you can make those kind of games up elsewhere at quarterback a lot easier than you can from the wide receivers, as we kind of keep saying. David Montgomery going at RB62 there. He's somebody who, like, I feel like, there's nobody that I've changed more of an attitude toward this year than David Montgomery. Is he somebody that you'd be okay drafting in round 6?
He is, and it's funny because I've never been a David Montgomery guy, but there's a difference in a guy going in a certain spot when he's not very good. Like David Montgomery's fine, but he's not anything special as an NFL talent, and putting him somewhere solely because we project him for a lot of touches, right? Remember Mike Davis when he was on the Falcons? That's what we did with Mike Davis, where you're like, I don't know, it looks like he's going to get a lot of touches, so let's just put him, here in the RB dead zone. Montgomery is not that anymore, and we saw what Jamal Williams did. We've seen Montgomery produce, and we know that the Lions offense is good. So I'm actually pretty into him this year for the first time ever.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the great things about best ball, like, because it's such a seasonal thing, it's easy to pivot. It's not, with Dynasty, it can become kind of quite easy to get tied to things like college production or stuff like that. But best ball, if you're not reevaluating the landscape based solely on player values, ADP, and team situations every year, then you're doing it wrong. Trevor Lawrence has made it back to us here. We've got a bit of ADP value on him because he's fallen from 58 down to pick 70, which is another one of those things that can happen when you've got all the pieces of a stack. Nobody wants to take him. So we'll do that, and that'll make Rob happy knowing that somebody's got that double stack nicely. So so far, we've got a real hero RB build. We've got 4 wide receivers, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, and then Saquon Barkley and Trevor Lawrence. Is there any position you'd feel like you should be going towards here? Do you like Pacheco at the top of that? Or, are you leaning towards Rachaad White, who does play against the Jaguars in week 16?
I don't love Pacheco, and he goes there anyway. I don't have a super strong preference here? Who do you like?
I've been taking quite a lot of James Conner. I'll just add him to the queue, but we could always go down to Evan Ingram and really just hammer that Jag stack if you want to do that.
Let's do Connor. I haven't really been drafting a ton of Connor, and I don't have any real super strong reason to not be drafting Connor, other than, he is not my cup of tea in terms of, an older running back who's pretty volume dependent, not very excited for the Cardinals, but you don't get like a lot of, even in this new landscape with the running back prices, you still don't get the lead back on an offense who catches passes, who's been really good for fantasy, who definitely has upside kind of this late. Like I said, even with the new kind of landscape of wide receivers going earlier. So when I reach that spot and nobody in particular like majorly jumps out to me, I'm okay with dipping my toes in there. And that's another thing with like our exposure tools or just managing your own exposure on your own, is you can get to those kind of flat tiers and say, if I think all these guys are pretty similar and I haven't drafted James Conner, but I keep clicking the same guy every single time, there really isn't a strong reason for that. So you can mix in Conner when it makes sense. And I think it did here.
Yeah, there's a helicopter hovering over my house at the minute, so apologies for that. But right. I think it's very easy, particularly towards the opening and close of each round, to get caught in the same player selections very often. I think James Conner's someone for me that, I mean, yeah, he misses games and stuff, but there's no backup competition there. I feel like he's fairly quarterback proof in terms of whatever Arizona's going to trot out, he'll have good spike weeks, and I feel like he's possibly going to be more efficient than Rashad White. We saw how bad he was last year with that bad offensive line. And James Cook's somebody who goes nearby as well, who I just haven't really been able to pull the trigger because I've been going for Damian Harris, who goes later, and I feel like he'll score a bunch of touchdowns more. So we're in round 8. We've got our 1-2-4-0 build, as you can see there, thanks to Spike Week tools. So far, Felix has got no quarterback. Pretty much every other team, apart from the ones towards the front of the draft, have got at least one quarterback. And we're hitting that zone where Anthony Richardson goes off the board. Nice little double tap at quarterback there for that team. And that's kind of, if I've missed out on the elite quarterbacks, I've always, I feel more prone to doing a double tap on quarterback there. Where are you at on Anthony Richardson? You probably try and answer that before we get to our next pick, if you feel like it.
Yeah, I like Anthony Richardson at this cost. I do think we're going to get to a certain point where it may not make a ton of sense to have a ton of him. I think it's very not the same thing as Trey Lance. They had different situations in terms of being certain if Trey Lance was even going to play, but it is upside is extremely important, and I value it, and that's why I am interested in Richardson. But it isn't everything. It's still a probability game and a cost game. And so if he gets too expensive, I'm probably not going to have a ton. And on DraftKings, his rushing is great, and I think he can be okay passing. Like you said, how many times is he going to throw for 300 yards? And that hurts a little bit.
Okay, so we're up here. Let's see. So we've got Javonte Williams up there. He's not somebody I've been taking so far. Brandon Cooks, Aaron Rodgers, Jahan Dotson, Brian Robinson, Quentin Johnson, Daniel Jones. Anyone kind of standing out to you there?
I like Jahan Dotson here.
I like that one. Let's go with him before time runs out. Because you're quite big on the Commanders this year, aren't you?
I'm very big on the Commanders this year. I like to find these spots where, it's just a very cheap offense, right? Terry McLaurin goes in, let's call it the fifth round, fifth round. Both of the running backs go outside of the top 100, give or take, depending upon the site that you're on. The quarterbacks don't even get drafted. I'm one of the only crazies drafting Sam Howell. Nobody's drafting Jacoby Brissett. Curtis Samuel's very cheap. It's like, these are talented players, and this offense could be pretty good. And yet it's very cheap. And so you get Eric Bieniemy into town. There's a lot of reasons for optimism, I think, with Washington, but they're all very cheap. And so Dotson had a good rookie year. Second year wide receivers are a good thing to target. So I'm pretty into that.
Okay, so we're back up now. One player who kind of jumps out a little to me is Daniel Jones. He'd give us a little bit of correlation with Cooper Kupp for Week 17 when the Rams play the Giants. Like, do you want to go down that road and sort of sort out our quarterback room for the good, or is there anyone else standing out?
Yeah,
for you?
let's do Jones, because you also have a ton of Giants wide receivers that go.
Yeah,
You're
we've
gonna have
got
to tell
Saquon
me.
Barkley.
You're going to have to tell me which Giants wide receiver we need to add to our Jones and Saquon stack, because I do really like Jalen Hyatt, but outside of him, it's they have 6 slot receivers, and so I don't know which one of those slot receivers is going to be on the field. But I do really like Jalen Hyatt, and I think you can draft Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley on the same team, and it's completely fine.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's kind of like, Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, and then plus one more player is kind of nice. I mean, we've got a couple of teams now where we've got little stacks and we can be done at quarterback. I'll bring back up the draft board here. So there goes Juju, unstacked without any of his big wide receivers again. another one of those. I don't want to bring up a source of pain, but Javonte Williams was somebody you were quite in on last year. Do you have any optimism from this year?
Not a lot. I want to see Javonte fall a little bit more before I start to dip my toes in. I know that there have been positive reports, but it's May, man. Of course, there are positive reports on players. It's the middle of May. We don't generally come out and the coaches don't come out and dunk all over their own players. And most injury recoveries early on, you probably feel optimistic, but we're a long ways away from Javonte being ready to play. I think there's a lot of risk in just the Denver offense in general with Sean Payton in town. There's upside as well. But if things don't go well, they're not tied to Russ for next year. Sean Payton may want to just kind of start over. They did pay Samaje Perine a good amount of money. And so I will have a cost that I'm okay drafting Javonte at. I think he has the potential to be kind of a playoff hammer type guy if things go well. But I think he's a little riskier than maybe this cost is factoring in. I just want to say really quickly, Fantasy Football Garage asked about Robinson or Gibson. I'm very much Gibson over Brian Robinson, especially on DraftKings. But honestly, I think the enemy and drafting Chris Rodriguez and them really hyping up Antonio Gibson, I think he's got a little more upside than Robinson does.
Yeah, well, pick back up on that. So we're back up. Do you want to take another running back here? We've only got 2 so far. Zach Charbonnet, Samaje Perine, Khalil Herbert, Rashad Penny, Damian Harris all there. Do you want to go with your boy Damian Harris or see if he comes back to us on the next pick?
I was going to say, let's take Penny.
Penny, love that.
If you saw on the screen there, I'm touting our own tools. We have a Week 16 and Week 17 correlation with Rashad Penny. He plays the Giants in Week 16 and the Cardinals for James Conner in Week 17. And sneakily, that would be kind of good for James Conner because he's probably never going to run for 200 yards. But if the Eagle just beat the crap out of the Cardinals and he catches 12 passes, in garbage time, that would be nice. And I just kind of like Rashad Penny, similar to Damian Harris, where I think that they can just have monster rushing seasons on these 2 awesome offenses.
So your colleague Beaker did take Damian Harris. That one felt a little predictable.
He's fired.
There.
He's fired.
Is there anyone else at the top here? Do you want to go Zay Jones and really pad that Jags stack? Or
Gosh, I just don't really love Zay's.
Chigozie Okonkwo's there. We've got,
we could take Gibson.
Yeah, let's do that. I think for me, I'm a little bit cautious with Antonio Gibson because it's kind of hard to get away from that point last year where he was fielding punts and it seemed like we didn't want them.
I know.
But what I keep having to tell myself is Eric Bieniemy wasn't there at the time and this is a new offense. And, Ron Rivera is 100% coaching for his job right now. I think it could be very easy for the Commanders' new owners to just want a shiny new forward-thinking coach and not Ron Rivera. So I do think this is kind of a make it or break it season for Antonio Gibson. And I'm quite all right with that. We've got through 11 rounds, we've got Saquon, we've got James Conner, Rashad Penny, and Antonio Gibson, which definitely could be viewed as fragile in some versions of that.
That is
in terms of the bye weeks, we've got a 13, 14, 10 and 14. So in week 14, we'd only have Saquon and Rashad Penny. Do you view that as a situation where we want to probably add at least one more, or you kind of, if you find yourself in these builds, do you ever push it and just stick with the 4?
I think on DraftKings, this would definitely be at least a 5 running back team for me. Just thinking about, a second round pick and then a 7th round pick and then 2 kind of middle round picks. I want to add just a little bit more juice to kind of our collective profile at running back. And then the other thing that I do like to think about with the late round picks is just, it doesn't matter all that much which position you pick. The conversation is about whether you take the onesie position, like we talked about earlier, versus like a flex play between running backs and wide receivers. And a lot of the times the running backs, even if it feels murky late in drafts, right? The contingent value of running backs, if the player in front of them gets hurt, is just, you can have a top 10, a top 15 running back in the 19th round. And so I think that's where, especially with 20 picks, I'll lean into it a little bit more.
Yeah, it makes sense. I've occasionally pushed it and had four RB builds. I think going back 2 years ago, I had a final in the $3 contest where I had 10 wide receivers and 4 running backs, and then 3 of each of the onesies, but it ended up flailing out in there, so it's not one I'm really chasing too much. Do you have a particular build that you're kind of leaning towards at this point in the season? I mean, I'm, much like you, I'm quite partial to the other 0 RB teams. I'm quite fine, going with hero RB teams as well. But I just find when I start dual running back at the minute, I really feel like I'm missing out on the wide receivers.
That's definitely my big takeaway, and I can touch on it here in a second. I was going to bring up. I want to ask about this guy because I don't have a strong take on him, and I don't love the profile, but I really like Hyatt. Obviously, I think he's probably my preference here. But how's your feeling on Jonathan Mingo in Carolina?
I quite like Mingo. I think it's, you don't want to get caught too much in a somebody has to catch the ball mentality. We saw that flail out horribly with Darnell Mooney last year. But I think Mingo offers something which the other players there don't. So I'd take Mingo and then see if we get Hyatt to come back around.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, and then we'll probably be in quite a strong position to not really need to worry too much about our wide receivers at that point. Let's see. Hyatt makes it back, so we'll take him, because we get those kind of double tap of playoff weeks as well. So kind of really stacking them up nicely. And what we've got there is another one of the Spikeweek overlays showing us those kind of LA Rams at New York Giants in the playoffs, and we've got 4 players in that game. We've got Carolina at Jacksonville with 4 players in that one, which correlates nicely with our Jaguars stack. And then we've got the Arizona and Philly double running back one there. So I think this is a quite nicely correlated team. And, a couple of weeks ago when I did first one of these streams, I talked about the team which won the Milly Maker last year. When you looked at it on paper, it wasn't a particularly pretty team. It wasn't one where you'd rush to Twitter and boast about it and everybody would have nice things to say. It was one which had plenty of correlation, and that seemed to really be enough to take it over the line. And, you look at that team and then you look at Pat's team that won him $2 million, and it really feels like something that's worth paying attention to. It shouldn't be something which we chase completely, but it should definitely be at the backs of our minds all the time.
Absolutely. That little feature that you showed there, the kind of the show playoffs and the show teams, that's one of my favorites, because even though we know it and we're trying to light up with green and those things on the screen where you can see your correlations, like after you pick guys, you can kind of forget. You're like, oh wait, oh yeah, we did have James Conner, and oh yeah, he does play the Eagles, and you only got 30 seconds once you come on the clock to make that pick. So this is just a way to be like, oh, look over here. You do or do not have a correlation in this game, and maybe we don't need anything more in the Carolina Jacksonville game. It's like if you were to build a DFS team with that, right? That's what you would do. You would double stack Trevor Lawrence, and you would have a probably a nice cheap bring back with Jonathan Mingo on the other side. It fits really well, and we have 3 different fun correlations. I really like it.
I think I
love the cost. I love the like things with like Mingo and Hyatt and including those guys in there that are high upside, but also not spending your first like 8 picks, on the same couple of games.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's one of those that could have sneaky upside because, Carolina, everyone expects them to take a bit of a step forward. Jags might struggle to be quite as fantasy gold as they were in the playoffs this year, where they were winning people, millions of dollars and that. But it's a nice little one to target. I think, the only piece that I'd consider adding to it is Hayden Hurst because we don't have a tight end yet. I think so far there is just ourselves and Felix's team. Oh no, Felix took Dawson Knox. So we are the only team without a tight end. In those situations, do you feel like you can push it further because everybody else is kind of like they've got somebody, or do you feel like now's the time where we need to start, paying attention to the tight end position and chase that a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit of both, I think, sort of a cop-out answer. But I do feel like you can break ties by pushing it. But you also have, quite a few other teams that do only have one. And this is a range where a lot of people like to close out that tight end room, right? They have their one. It's probably a pretty good one. And then they come back here and they're like, yep, let's add Hayden Hurst. And, I'm good. I'm good at tight end. And we're trying to probably find three tight ends. And so we don't want to get completely locked out. So I'm willing to reach a little bit sometimes on those guys.
Do you want to take Gerald Everett as our first one? We don't have any correlation with him, but he's the kind of player who can go off, and they play the Broncos in week 17, which, they're a good pass defense, but they're not definitely necessarily up to stopping this Chargers offense if they really get going this year under Kellen Moore. Next pick will be with us soon. Do you want to look at running back or kind of push that further down the line later on?
I was going to say, I really like Jaylen Warren. I really like Jaylen Warren.
That's where I would have gone, but he's gone. In terms
Nico,
of tight end,
I was going to say wide receiver, Nico and Van Jefferson both look good. Tight end, we have Hurst. I don't know that there's a running back I totally love here. Hurst is the top tight end on the board. So even though it's a little reach by ADP, I think it's okay, right? We're picking at the turn.
I think I'm okay with that as well because of the position we're in with tight end, and we've got really good value all through this draft. We got sort of 12 spots on Trevor Lawrence earlier on, and we haven't really reached on anyone so far, so I don't feel like we've sacrificed too much. And now that we've got Hayden Hurst and Gerald Everett, it feels like we can be a bit more comfortable about when we take the rest of our players. So let's just take a quick look at the board. We've got 2571 from Beaker on the pick one. Really hammered those wide receivers before getting AJ Dillon, Damian Harris, Zach Charbonnet, Kendry Miller, Jaylen Warren. That's a really nice build. I definitely would be happy with that myself.
That's a Spike Week, bro, right there for sure.
For the brand. How do you feel about the rookie tight ends, Eric?
I love the rookie tight ends this year. I think they're a great example of the difference in best ball and just kind of a season-long fantasy. Like, look, if I draft Sam Laporta in my home season-long league, I don't really feel very comfortable plugging him into my starting lineup, right? I understand the issues with rookie tight ends historically. The difference is in best ball, I get to draft multiple tight ends. I don't have to pick when to start Sam Laporta. And I'm also looking for outliers in best ball. Now, you're not going to go, you're not trying to say that, anything can happen, but the market is dinging all rookie tight ends, right? Except Kyle Pitts, I guess, 2 years ago. The market is completely dinging every rookie tight end, no matter how great the situation is or how good, right? Sam Laporta is a very high draft pick. TJ Hawkinson's gone. Jameson Williams is suspended for 6 weeks. DeAndre Swift is gone. This is a pretty great spot for a rookie tight end to pop up who's a very strong receiver like Laporta is. And so Michael Mayer was maybe the best receiving tight end of the whole class, and nobody wants to draft him either. So I just like to kind of, when the market is dinging these guys for things, but they have a clear path to upside, even though there's reasons to be, cautious about rookie tight ends in general, I like to dip my toes in there. And so I'm pretty into the rookie tight ends.
Yeah, I think it's kind of obvious you shouldn't, like, for me, I don't really want to build 2 tight end builds with rookie tight ends, but if you build in a 3 tight end room, I'm completely fine with them. I think that they've all got plenty of upside, or at least some of the ones at the top. there's a running back who I'd be interested in taking, Chuba Hubbard, with our next pick. I think, again, we do have the kind of pass catching side, and we'd be building out that Jags Panthers correlation a bit further. I don't know if you're interested in him. I feel like he could easily see an awful lot of touches this year, or do you prefer like Tajay Spears or, old Lenny?
Chuba easily for me here. I would probably take Chuba on this team, even if we didn't have the Jag stuff. I believe that he is just very undervalued. We're projecting a lot. Chuba going in what round are we in? 16th, 17th by ADP is a 17th round pick. And Miles Sanders is like a 4th or a 5th round pick. We're really projecting a lot, I think, here onto Miles Sanders, where I'm not saying Chuba should be a 9th round pick, but that gap is way too large. He's going to get some work, and he's definitely the handcuff to Miles Sanders. And so it just so happens to help us with Jags there. It gives us 2 cheap outs on the opposite side of our Jag stack. I was going to throw Mims is Marvin Mims is another guy here at the top of the list that I like a lot. Also correlates with our Gerald Everett.
I'd suggest even Mims or Tyler Conklin, who gives us a bit of correlation for Week 16 against Washington, and I think he's possibly getting undervalued. Do you want to go Conklin or Mims?
Let's do Conklin, actually. Let's do Conklin.
Nice. And then that's that kind of taken care of. So and pull up the draft board again. So we've got a 2-5-7-3 build. I feel like the quarterback situation between Lawrence and Daniel Jones is quite nice and taken care of. Running back, we kind of talked about how having 5 would be nice there. And tight end, I don't know about you, but I never really go over 3. It feels like far too many resources pulled into that. Even knowing that last year the finals average for DraftKings of like a 900-person final was 3.1 tight ends, I have to feel like that 4th tight end on a lot of teams probably harmed them in the finals more than anything. So I'm kind of quite good with that. We've got Updog in the chat saying, I like all these guys late, Hardman, Mims, etc. Yeah, I think there's plenty of, and that's why what we did there in terms of taking 3 tight ends in 4 rounds with Everett Hurst and then Conklin with Chuba Hubbard in between, because it doesn't feel like the drop-off between Mims and Hardman is too much to where we'll probably find ourselves. And then, it gets a little messy later on. Josh Downs, definitely taking a good bit of him. I think he's somebody who could really come on as the season goes. When you and Rob were talking, I was kind of surprised by how many Justin Herbert stacks centered around Josh Palmer, because it just feels like Josh Palmer's time's been and gone. Like, if he couldn't be somebody when he had all the opportunity last year, he's definitely not somebody I'm targeting this year. And I was definitely somebody who was hyping up Palmer last year and thought he could be something.
Yep, I agree. I mean, not only did they draft Quentin Johnston, they drafted Darius Davis too, like really high. I mean, I don't know why they drafted Darius Davis as highly as they did, but they did. The fact of the matter is that, like, I'm not even sure Josh Palmer gets on the field this year aside from, injury. And so, that was a drastically over-owned stack to me. But to Updog's point and to your point, this is the nice thing about DraftKings sometimes, but it's also why I think we are willing to push it a little bit here with maybe our last either 2 or 3 wide receivers. Is there are, like, I see paths for Tank Dell. Darius Slayton makes a lot of sense on this team. You mentioned Josh Downs. There's a lot of guys back here that I think you can take shots on DraftKings at wide receiver, more so than Underdog even.
Yeah, so Darius Slayton finds his way back to us. Do you want to add him to the Daniel Jones Giants?
Absolutely.
Stack?
Yep.
Let's go for it. This team's going to look nice.
You could screenshot this one. It may not win the Millie, but you can put it on Twitter and people will like it.
That's it. I mean, if we're not farming engagement, then what are we doing really? It's May 17th, and we're drafting for something that starts in 4 months from now. This is the winner.
Exactly.
So, in terms of the guys at the top of a wide receiver, we're 1 pick away, about on the clock now. Anybody stand out for you?
Trying just to Tillman makes some sense. I don't totally love him, but reasonable draft capital could replace DPJ. I think Tillman's my favorite guy here.
Yeah, let's go Tillman. I like that. I've not taken a huge amount of him, but I definitely do believe in what Cleveland have been saying about, or putting the whispers out there that they want to be more pass heavy this year, and he could be somebody who comes on strong by the end of the season. Like Donovan Peoples-Jones was somebody I played a lot of in DFS last year.
I know. I know that feeling. Yeah.
It's just, got to learn and let go of him when the time's right.
And I mean, if they are being honest about wanting to pass more, well, Deshaun needs to play a little bit better if they're going to, stick to that. But if we assume that Watson gets a little bit better, I like DPJ just fine, but he's not a player. If Tillman would have gone higher had he not had the injury, and came back to school and had the injury and basically not played his final year at Tennessee. So Amari's getting older. I mean, I like Amari, but Amari's getting older. Elijah Moore's probably really only a slot receiver for them. I like some of these guys that maybe go this late, right? So we took Mingo, and I think Mingo is a totally fine pick, especially on this team. But Jonathan Mingo wasn't substantially better as a prospect than Cedric Tillman was. It's just that he landed on a spot where we're well, he's probably going to get the ball. Cedric Tillman, by camp, we could be saying, oh my gosh, Cedric Tillman's the starting outside wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. Is it likely? I don't know. But the only reason he goes back here and Mingo goes up there is because we're more certain about the role.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's kind of sometimes the draft capital can lead decisions a little bit. And Mingo, like you say, I'm completely fine with where we took him in the 12th round, but it wouldn't be surprising to see several wide receivers who possibly went later go on to have bigger seasons. But the things just kind of stack quite nicely for Mingo for best ball. It feels like, Adam Thielen's going to have his weeks, DJ Chark's going to have his weeks, but Jonathan Mingo could be the kind of dynamic player that come to playoffs is what really matters. And so much of best ball, when we're talking about these player takes, it's I was reading something earlier today talking about Anthony Richardson and how he could be a struggle bus in year one, but it's well, get me to the fantasy playoffs. And if Anthony Richardson is there and if he's rushing the ball well, then that's absolutely the ticket. I wrote an article for Underdog recently talking about the path for Anthony Richardson to succeed it's in the rushing game. So last year, out of all the players who had 30 points or more at quarterback position, 2/3 of them rushed for 39 yards or more. It's we know where fantasy points come for at that position. We're about to be back up here. Just see what we've got. So it's Corey Davis, Nelson Aguilar, Ty Montgomery, Randall Cobb, Noah Brown, Ben Skowronek, Laviska. Anybody at all, Eric?
Can you go back up a little bit? I was going to throw out just a little bit more. Tyler Scott for the Bears.
Okay, yeah.
I like if we're hunting for wide receivers here late, we didn't really take a bunch of rookies or anything like that early. And then building out our depth with the rookies when we have 10 wide receivers. Yeah. So we're drafting 10 wide receivers. We don't really need Tyler Scott and Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt and stuff to pop, especially immediately. But we have Cooper Kupp, right? We have T. Higgins. We have good veteran wide receivers. Terrace Marshall, I understand, made sense, but the fourth wide receiver conversation for the Browns is a different conversation than the fourth wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. Apologies to any Panthers fans, but if you prefer Marshall, but the young guys back here that look, we're not projecting anything amazing for Cedric Tillman or Tyler Scott, but we're talking about the way Tyler Scott gets on the field is by being better than Chase Claypool. That seems like a reasonable path for a late round rookie, right? And if the Bears also do kind of what the Browns did, throw more than they've been throwing historically, if Tyler Scott's decent, if Cedric Tillman's decent, these guys can really come on strong down the stretch, and we could use a little more wide receiver juice at the end of drafts. So the other thing that Mike Leone outlined and Pat Green's been bringing up a lot that's really huge for the number one biggest thing for your playoff expected value is not dead players. I know that sounds silly, and usually it's injuries, right? Of course, we can't predict injuries, but players get cut. Players are healthy scratches. But like these guys are the types of guys, like rookies, they're going to be on the team. Like Tyler Scott is not getting cut. And like over the course of the season, those are the guys that just are going to get a shot over the crappy veterans like Chase Claypool. And so I like to use like break ties with the younger guy as opposed to, whatever I'm trying to think of who, like Kendrick Bourne. Like,
yeah.
I would rather take a shot on this guy, even though he's probably going to be nothing. Kendrick Bourne is also probably going to be nothing. And there's no ceiling to worry about with Kendrick Bourne, where there might be with the rookies.
Yeah, I think you can make that argument with the Bears. I mean, by now we saw the Bears give up what was turned into the 32nd pick overall for Chase Claypool. And then they didn't even seem to understand how to use him. They couldn't really get anything going with him. So outside of DJ Moore and possibly Darnell Mooney, you're really not talking about an offense that's like steeped in talent. So I don't mind taking shots on players like that, because on a team where we don't have exposure to Justin Fields or anybody like that, it's like, okay, well, just that tiny little hedge of, okay, well, if the Bears do turn in a really good performance in week 16, 17 or down the stretch, then it could come good for us anyway. Just looking at the teams that we've got, so we were one of two teams who went with a 10 wide receiver room. It felt like the right kind of build for us, though. Does anything else stand out for you? We've got Felix at the end who went 3-7-8-2. His tight ends were Dawson Knox and Isaiah Likely. And even as a Ravens fan, I've got to sort of like worry slightly about Isaiah Likely, even with the new Todd Monken offense. At the beginning, we've got 2-7-8-2 for Beaker, who started with that kind of real zero RB approach until round 8 when he took AJ Dillon. Any of these kind of teams or builds standing out to you, Eric?
Oh, of course I like B. Kurt's team. He's still fired, but I like B. Kurt's team. Felix, I love you, but I'm happy that your team is in our group because I don't know if you'll score tight end points all season. And then, yeah, I mean, we got a little honestly lucky with I think Updog said it, like, this is some really good pod variance. I think that is true. The 2 spot, really hammered a lot of early running backs and is going to be really struggling at wide receiver. The multiple teams with double elite quarterback, teams with double elite tight end. I think that can be half the battle of a best ball draft, is like, just don't screw it up and like let your opponents, screw it up. And we may have gotten a little lucky in that regard in this draft.
Excellent. So I'll let you get out of here, Eric. But before we go, tell people what you've got going on at Spike Week and what they should be going and subscribing to, because I can't say enough about how brilliant I think a lot of the work you guys are doing is.
Well, I really appreciate that. Definitely go to spikeweek.com. Spikeweek.com/go-premium is where you can get access to everything Spike Week Premium. We have, of course, like a lot of places do, best ball rankings. You can download the rankings and use them in your drafts on Underdog, on Draftkings, and on Drafters. We have a bunch of, kind of like what I would call micro tools for just the best ball sickos, right? The playoff schedule, bye week cheat sheet, and that best ball contest selector, and tons of those things. But definitely our bread and butter is this Draft Hacker, these overlays that you saw here. We of course offer them for Underdog and Drafters as well. But honestly, the thing where we've really beefed it up the most is on DraftKings, because frankly, DraftKings needed it to be beefed up a little bit. And so you subscribe to premium, you could get access to it's driven by a browser extension, which you would get access to. And then that's where you can see all of you'll upload your teams to Spike Week, and you can see everything that Tom had there on his screen, see the exposure that you have to players. And we actually have like a ton of options that you can select to show on your screen while you're drafting. So Tom only had a couple. That's how I am too. I can't handle but I've seen people with like 15 different percentages up on their screen, and like they know what they all are. You can see what players are, like if you take your first round pick, you can see exposure to all players later that you drafted with that first round pick. There's just a ton of different options. That's one of our 2 bread and butters. And then our Draft IQ tool, which is more of once you draft your teams and you upload them, this is a place to go analyze them and see what's in your portfolio and see really the nitty gritty of the teams that you drafted. So those would be the two things that we really offer. That's our sweet spot at Spike Week. And I do think I'm clearly biased, but if you're playing best ball at all seriously and drafting multiple teams, like, it has improved my game. We are best ball players building these. We're not just building them, for fun or to make money. We're building them because this is what we want to use. This is what we use every single day to draft our teams and analyze our teams. So I couldn't recommend it enough, even though, like I said, I am a little biased.
Good stuff. Okay, so before you get out of here, if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button. Really helps us out. We're still growing. We're on a mission for 1,000 subscribers by the time the training camp opens up. Best ball show next week. We've got Pat Crane coming on. More great guests coming after that. Rich's Dynasty content is just fully rolling at this time of year. Thanks for checking us out. We'll be back soon.